Welcome to the Exodus and Beyond. I'm your host, author R.J. von-Bruening. In this video series, we'll be exploring the Exodus from an esoteric understanding as explored in my book, The Exodus and Beyond, Book 2 of Unlocking the Dream Vision. In this video, we'll take a look at the twin brothers, the underworld, and the gods they followed. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below and don't forget to subscribe for future videos. This series presents information based in part upon theory and conjecture of the system of esoteric symbolism. The purpose is to suggest some possible interpretation, but not necessarily the only one to the many mysteries we will explore. In this episode, we'll begin learning a bit more about these mysterious twin brothers of legend and the gods they followed. If we take a look at the Mesoamerican myths about the twin brothers and the underworld, we can gain a sense of this ongoing change of how the gods started to become more human and less otherworldly. Remarkably, the concepts of the underworld are very similar to the stories of the creation of man, the star that fell from heaven, the great flood, and even the mighty heaven floating up above the clouds. As with those stories, the stories of the underworld are found in every single ancient civilization, culture, and society across the world. The idea of the underworld is so universal that it has been put forward many times that it may be as old as humanity itself. This could be correct, but as we learn from our journey through the dream vision, there are numerous symbolic aspects of the ancient mythologies of the underworld that have been overlooked. As with the other mythologies we have explored, to properly understand the ancient mythology of the underworld, we must always be aware of and look for the common esoteric symbolism within the stories. However, unlike the other stories we've examined, when exploring the underworld's mythology, we need to always keep in mind that our ancient ancestors' ideas of death and our modern-day concept are two vastly different things. We must always keep the idea in the back of our minds that our ancient ancestors viewed death a little bit differently than we do today. In the modern world, death usually refers to the actual death of the physical body. However, in the ancient world, death was not so quite specific in its meaning. An individual who had been exiled, banished, or sold into slavery, or taken into bondage, with the idea that this individual was never going to return to the community, would be thought of as dead to those left behind. This general idea applied to anyone who had no expectation that they would return. It also included individuals who may have set off on long journeys or voyages to unknown lands and who not return until long after they were expected to. The legendary story of Odysseus is a perfect example of this. Within the myth, Odysseus is not able to return home for almost 20 years, although his wife Penelope believed that he may still be alive. The community and his kingdom believed him to be dead, with numerous requests that she remarry. In the end, Odysseus returns and claims his household and reasserts his place as the rightful king. Nevertheless, his wife cannot believe her husband has really returned, with her fearing that he might be some god in disguise. She eventually tests him by ordering her servant to move the bed from their wedding chamber. Odysseus protests that it cannot be removed, for he made the bed himself, and one of its legs is actually a living olive tree. After this test, she finally accepts that her husband has indeed returned to her. Once she accepts that her husband has returned, the people of his kingdom also accept that he returned. Unfortunately, in the ancient world, most individuals that had been through a long ordeal and thought to have been dead were not as lucky as Odysseus. For most, if by some chance one of these dead individuals happened to return for some reason, families, friends, and the community would still treat them as if they were physically dead. Their property, their household, and their claims would have all been given away or taken over by others. It would also not be uncommon for the family or the community to physically kill them if they had returned. Ancient folklore is filled with countless tales of the dead returning and being dealt with a harshly, generally violent manner. Understanding that being dead in the ancient world did not necessarily mean a physical death of the body, we can understand that this state of being dead is more of a symbolic death. It was reserved for people who were believed by others that they would never be seen again, although there's a really good chance that they were still much alive. Understanding this, we can then realize that the underworld's traditional interpretation of being populated by the spirits of the physically dead is most likely incorrect. It is most likely that the underworld was populated by individuals who very much were physically alive, but symbolically dead to their family, communities, and society in general. They became the damned souls with no place or future within accepted human society and were treated as they were physically dead. In time, these damned souls came to be viewed as the walking dead. Once they became viewed as the walking dead, it is not difficult to imagine how our ancient ancestors symbolically came to view them as spirits or ghosts that were damned to walk the earth if they happened to return to the communities they'd come from. If for some reason one of these symbolically dead happened to return to try to contact family, loved ones, or close ones, it is highly likely that these individuals may have been in bad shape, wearing torn or dirty clothes, and possibly even starving or ill. It doesn't take much of imagination to see how an individual that had been exiled and believed to be symbolically dead by their family, friends, and community, that happened to come sneaking around in the inky darkness of a moonless night in unkept, dirty clothes, possibly carrying a small light source like a small lantern that threw off an eerie glow as they moved through the darkness. This, of course, would scare anybody who happened upon this poor soul. This would, in turn, be spoken of as seeing a dead person who was walking around. Again, it doesn't take much imagination to see how these symbolically dead people were turned into the idea of lost souls and damned spirits that come to be viewed as ghosts of the dead. Our modern day lore as related to ghosts and spirits of the dead still contain many of these elements. In keeping with this general idea in mind, we can begin interpreting the mythology of the underworld in an entirely new way. In addition, due to our esoteric understanding of the dream vision of Enoch, we have something that those who came before us do not, which is being able to place the ancient myths in their proper order within the esoteric and more traditional historical timelines. Our first step is to understand that there are two basic concepts of the underworld. The first comes directly from the oldest surviving written story in its original form that we know of today, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Within its text, we are told that the underworld is a dark and gloomy and dreary place where the dead go, no matter their social standing. In this most ancient of stories, we are told that the underworld is a house of darkness where the dead drink dirt and eat stone. The second idea that comes from a much later date than the Epic of Gilgamesh is the more traditional idea that the underworld is a multi-level hell-like environment, where wrongdoers, criminals, sinners, and those who have blasphemed against the gods were sent for punishment for their transgressions in this world. This change in this general concept of the underworld can be first seen in ancient Mesopotamian, in Sumerian and Akkadian poems, which were written long after the time of the Epic of Gilgamesh. In these poems, we are told that the Queen of the Dead and sister of a goddess known as Ishtar, she was said to be the ruler of a vast 7-level underworld kingdom, with each level being separated from each other by a great gate. Our first clue to understanding these two different ideas of the underworld and how they are related to the twin brothers comes from a few different sources, but primarily from the mythology of the Mesoamerican cultures. In almost all the known Mesoamerican myths, legends, and folklore of the underworld, they usually refer to the legendary twin brothers of mythology in some manner. In many of these myths, it is due to the actions of the brothers, or more common theme found within the mythology is that we're born into this world because of the direct actions of the gods or the lords of the underworld. Remarkably, within these myths, the general ideas about the underworld will undergo their change from a dark and gloomy place that we find in the Epic of Gilgamesh to the terrible hell-like underworld where wrongdoers of this life are punished in some horrible fashion fitting their transgressions and sins. Within these myths, we learn of an important creation story about the birth of the Mayan hero twins. Within this myth, we are told that when the great maize god, their father, and his brother, their uncle, were playing a game of Pakatak, the gods of the underworld became greatly annoyed by the noise and were also incredibly envious of the brothers' talents. Pakatak is the violent ball game that was played both by mortals and the gods, who were equally obsessed with and played with a solid rubber ball which typically weighed around 9 pounds or 4 kilograms. It is said that the original ball court was situated just above the entrance of the underworld. Upon this ball court, the gods of the underworld summoned the two brother gods to put them through a series of games or tests to see if they were as good as they claimed to be. We are told that the brother gods outwitted all the gods of the underworld in all their tests, and also made it through their 9 levels of the underworld. Their final test, and the reason for all the other tests, was to play the first game of Pakatak among the gods of the underworld upon the great stone ball courts sitting over the underworld. Although the brothers played with great skill and swiftness, in the end they lost to the lords of the underworld. The lords of the underworld then sacrificed the brother gods by cutting off their heads and then burying their bodies beneath the ball court. The myth then tells us that the head of the maize god was placed in a calabash tree, where it was later found by the goddess of the underworld known as the blood moon. It is said that she became miraculously pregnant after the head spat into her hands, and she subsequently gave birth to the legendary Mayan hero twins. The myth says that as these brothers grew, they became excellent hunters and very accomplished Pakatak players. It is also believed that they had magical powers that were given to them by the creator gods that lived up above the sky. Let's speak of how the brothers caught a rat one day while out hunting. However, this was no ordinary rat, but it was a magical rat of the gods. The magical rodent tells the twin brothers what truly happened to their father and uncle at the hands of the lords of the underworld. It is unknown whether learning the truth about their father and uncle or the irresistible love of the game of Pakatak and the chance to challenge the gods of the underworld with a game is what lured the twin brothers to the underworld. Upon arriving at the entrance, the brothers allowed themselves to be drawn down into the underworld just as their father and uncle had done. And just as their father and uncle had done, the twin brothers easily survived all the brutal tests of the underworld. They are said to have spent their last night in the house of bats, where a monstrously vicious bat bit off the head of one of the brothers. The gods of the underworld then forced the other brother to play a game of Pakatak with his brother's head as the ball. Somehow, this brother cleverly switched his brother's head with that of a large rabbit. After easily winning the game, he reattached his brother's head to his body and then magically brought him back to life. Although the twin brother had won the game, the mighty lords of the underworld still wanted the brothers dead. The twin brothers eventually outwitted the lords of the underworld by using their magical abilities to make it appear that they had allowed themselves to be sacrificed upon a great fire. After returning to life, the twin brothers then slew all the lords and the gods of the underworld, except for one, the one known as Hun Came, or One Death. After killing the gods of the underworld, the brothers then returned to the surface and resurrected their father, the maize god, and his brother, their uncle. After the twin brothers had left the underworld, the last surviving lord of the underworld, One Death, brought back the 7th death, with whose help brought back the other 10 lords of the underworld. As with the Remus and Romulus stories, these stories of the Mayan tell us more about the political and social interactions between humans and the gods than it does about the twin brothers themselves. But unlike the Remus and Romulus story, these Mesoamerican myths show us that there was a highly political situation that was occurring between these children of Israel and the gods of Earth. With it being rather straightforward that the second phase of the Exodus was causing a massive political upheaval among the gods and a shift in power. Not only is this political situation of the gods reflected in the mythology, but we also get to a clue to why the messenger god was eventually replaced with the lord of the underworld in the original Trinity of the gods. These myths also provide us with the information that allows us to reconstruct a small piece of what may have happened while these Indo-European speaking children of Israel entered the Americas. According to the myths, as they moved across the Americas and began their settlement, they encountered the underworld and its rulers. As it is reflected in Mesoamerican myths, this contact resulted in a massive political and social upheaval. The myths tell us that eventually the lords of the underworld are defeated by the twin brothers in some manner. Although many details are missing, we can still see the same pattern of substitution of gods within the pantheon and also reflected within the mythology. But instead of reflecting the change to make peace with the local population, this change is representing a political change within the gods themselves. This allows us to understand that this change of the messenger god being replaced by the lord of the underworld reflects some type of peace settlement that was made between the lords of the underworld and the sky gods that the tribes followed. Remarkably, this change is carried across the Atlantic Ocean as seen within Greek and Roman mythology. We will return to the underworld a bit later, but before we can go any farther on our journey, we need to pause and take a more in-depth look at this polytheistic religion of these children of Israel and their many different gods. This naturally leads to the crucial question of how this original polytheistic religion developed into a monotheistic belief that we know of today. For us to start answering this question and many others, we need to first return to the early Proto-Indo-European people that settled in the ancient land of Canaan and the gods they worshipped. One of the more remarkable things about this ancient polytheistic belief of the earliest Proto-Indo-Europeans and then the later Indo-Europeans is that there was always 12 primary gods, with 3 of the most important ones always forming a Trinity. Amazingly, scholars and lay people alike never seem to notice this symbolic connection between the 12 gods of the ancient world and the Bible's 12 tribes of Israel. As with the 70 shepherds we encountered within the dream vision, this number 12 provides us with an important esoteric knowledge and understanding. In this case, the connection between the gods and the tribes of Israel by the number 12. This provides us with the reason why there are 12 tribes remembered in the Bible, and it was simply because there were 12 primary gods, with each god having one tribe that they control or all oversaw. Then each individual tribe would view this god as their tribal god and held it above all the others, while they would also worship the other 11 gods of the other tribes. This allows us to understand that in order to keep the peace between all the tribes, each god was included within the pantheon, thereby creating the 12 primary gods that all the tribes worshipped or honored. Although this is a highly simplistic understanding of an extraordinarily complex subject, it provides us with enough information of how the original pantheon came together for the tribes to allow us to take the next step in reconstructing some of this original religious belief of these people. Due to the Indo-European people's willingness to modify and substitute gods in their pantheon, it makes it exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, for us to reconstruct the original pantheon of the earliest Proto-Indo-European people entirely. Although we are not able to completely reconstruct the original pantheon, we have enough information to at least reconstruct this original trinity of gods and identify some common threads that we will see throughout all the mythologies. Our starting point is returning to the biblical story of Moses, with him first encountering his God, the God of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac during his exile from Egypt. As we've already discovered, this was the god known as Hadad of the Hyksos, commonly known as the Lord of the Waters. In time, this Lord of the Waters becomes known as the King of the Gods. The next point is to understand that the leadership of the twin brothers was based directly on this leadership of Moses and Aaron, who was being the warrior king and the other being the priest king. This understanding will allow us to see an important connection between this Lord of the Waters, Moses, and the warrior king of the twin brothers very shortly. The next step is our understanding that these early tribes of Israel each spoke a different language, but they had a common tongue that allowed the tribes to speak with one another. This common language is the language we call Proto-Indo-European, which in time became the primary Indo-European language that all modern language is based upon. Within this ancient language, it is believed that the Lord of the Waters and King of the Gods was known by the name Neptunius, a name that literally means grandson of the waters. This god Neptunius is the original Lord of the Waters that all the later gods of the waters like Poseidon and Neptune can trace their origins. This brings us to a connection that has been missed by all. By understanding that it was the divine twin brothers who settled in Rome and Greece, we can see the direct connection between the Lord of the Waters of the Proto-Indo-European people and the Lord of the Waters known as Neptune of Rome. When compared to all the other lords of the water, Rome is the only culture that kept the name of the god that is very close to its original Proto-Indo-European name. This connection allows us to realize that the warrior king of the twin brothers was following a belief that must have been very close to the original belief of the God of Moses. It is reasonable to assume that he, like Moses, was unyielding in those beliefs. Simultaneously, his brother, who was a priest king that had finally settled in Greece, appears to have been much more open to modifying and substituting the pantheon of gods to make peace with the native population. As we've already explored, the Lord of the Waters is the Lord God of the Bible that leads the Hebrews out of Egypt. He is also the God that leads the twin brothers around the world. It is this long period of interaction between this God and humanity that is one of the primary reasons that he is known as the King of the Gods. While at the same time, the Lord of the Waters was turning into the King of the Gods, the ever-present heaven orbiting high above becomes the supreme God that is always looking down upon humanity, like a great eye observing all of creation. To the Proto-Indo-Europeans, this supreme God was known as Dyeus-Pater, the Sky Father. As we've learned, the supreme god goes by many names, like Shiva, Zeus, Jupiter, or Arthur Mazda being the best known. This supreme god is always connected with the mighty storm, with him being commonly remembered as the storm god with his powerful thunderbolts. The next important god was the messenger god. This god is normally associated with fire in some manner. According to the mythology, this was and is the primary means of delivering messages, offerings, and sacrifices to the King of the Gods, or directly to the supreme God high above humanity. Since our esoteric knowledge allows us to understand that these gods were technologically advanced craft, we can very easily begin to recognize that the fire symbolism associated with this god must be due to some type of rocket-like propulsion system that generated a large cloud of fire and smoke upon launching or landing. As with all the gods, this messenger god went by many different names. Hermes and Mercury are two of the best known. It is believed that the Proto-Indo-Europeans may have called this god by some version of the word Hermes, which meant to be seen from afar and untiring. In later cultures, this messenger god becomes associated with the symbolism of the ram. With our knowledge of the esoteric symbolism, we know that the symbolism of the ram is normally related to a leader that has been raised up above his fellow men in some manner, normally with the help of a god. This symbolic connection allows us to realize that it is likely that the messenger god may have been the god responsible for elevating individual humans to kingship. These three gods become the basis of the Trinity of gods that still survives today within Christianity. This idea of the Trinity is easier to understand once we think of the second phase of the Exodus and the twin brothers being guided by the King of Gods just as they had been since leaving Egypt. With the supreme God always high above, looking down upon all of creation, it was the great eye of the Creator himself looking down upon all of humanity, with the messenger God moving between the two regularly. So regularly, it became embedded within the mythology which over thousands of years survives today as the Christian Trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, or Spirit. This brings us to one of the most significant misunderstandings related to the mighty heaven. Because if Shiva, Jupiter, Zeus, Arthur Mazda, among others, is the mighty heaven floating above, then where do all the other solar deities come from? This great mystery begins to disappear once we remember the fall of the Watchers and the fact that many of the people taken over by these children of the men who saw God already had names, customs, and beliefs related to the mighty heaven above. Many of these solar gods are leftovers from the time when the gods walked among humanity during the time between the fall of the Watchers and the Great Flood and the reconquest of Earth, while others are local versions of the Sky Father god during the time between the Great Flood and the coming of the children of Israel, with solar deities like Helios, Cronus, Anton, and Apollo being some of the more common ones. The gods of light, like Apollo, are always associated with being a solar deity or the solar disk itself. They're commonly believed to be the god that pulled the sun across the sky in a magical chariot, which as we know now is not the sun or solar disk, but really the mighty heaven, the abode of the host of heaven from an earlier time and much older traditions. It can also be understood that this magical chariot symbolism was used to represent the God that was in control of the mighty heaven as it moved across the sky, as if he was driving a chariot. Additionally, we must also remember the fall of the Watchers of when the star fell from heaven on that one early morning also brought freedom and knowledge to an enslaved humanity. This was the original Lord of Light, known as Lucifer within the Christian texts. This morning star of the biblical tradition and the book of Enoch, that over thousands of years this original Lord of Light, who was also the first savior of humanity, became directly associated with the great heaven above. This great Lord of Light had an incredible impact upon humanity that was deeply embedded within the existing cultures and societies that these Indo-European speaking children of Israel slowly took over. These beliefs were so embedded that they had little choice but to assimilate and fuse the existing versions of the Lord of Light, being the mighty heaven above, into the new supreme gods, so the local population would accept this new pantheon of gods as they were introduced. Within the monotheistic traditions, he was slowly demonized and transformed into an evil character that is often mistakenly remembered within the biblical tradition as Satan or the devil. As we learned with the fusing of the Aryan god Idra with Shiva, and then later with the god of Varnara, these early versions of the Lord of Light or the Sky Father were already associated with the mighty heaven above. They typically become an almost mirror image of the new supreme God. However, they tend to lose much of their power and standing in so many ways while also gaining new ones in the process. As we saw earlier with the god Apollo being used as a substitute for Zeus at the Oracle of Delphi. Since the female priesthood and the local population would not accept Zeus, the children of Israel substituted him with a god they would accept, in this case an ancient god of light that was very similar, known as Apollo. This was primarily because the local population knew who he was and his connection to the Minoans and the mother goddess of that civilization. Over time, Apollo slowly lost this standing, eventually being replaced with Zeus. This pattern of substituting the gods as needed into and out of the pantheon to bring peace among the cultures and societies they took over is seen repeatedly. It also helps explain why there are so many similar but different gods of light, sky fathers, and solar deities that are all related to the mighty heaven in some way. In many ways, most of them are essentially leftovers of a much earlier time, and they were changed and modified as needed, with many of the surviving ones being a version of the existing Sky Father that was worshipped alongside the Mother Goddess and the bull long before the arrival of these Indo-European speaking children of Israel. While others tended to be a combination of this older Lord of Light and the god that overthrew him, created during the Great Flood. This modifying and substitution of gods in the pantheon is what has led to so much confusion about identifying some of these ancient gods. Another factor that adds to the confusion is our esoteric knowledge that our ancient ancestors, when they saw one of these ships come down and their occupants exit, they viewed this event of the god transforming into something else, typically a bull, which is a symbolic representation of the first men. This duality adds another layer of confusion that can only be understood through this esoteric knowledge of the symbolism and the story held within the dream vision of Enoch and the history of creation that it holds. One final factor that we have not addressed in much detail is the type of thinking that our ancient ancestors applied to the mighty heaven floating above the clouds and the various ships that were seen entering and leaving this mighty abode of the host of heaven. To our ancient Neanderthal and later Cro-Magnon man ancestors, they would view any ship leaving the heaven and coming down to earth was a small part of this great unknowable supreme God of the heavens. In essence, it was breaking off a small piece of itself to come down and interact with humanity. It was thought of as a small earthly incarnation of the supreme God that was created so mere mortals could understand it and interact with it. So the God that came down was believed to be part of the unknowable supreme God's essence, just in a smaller, more understandable version for humanity. This type of thinking is still seen today within Christianity, and their idea that Jesus Christ, the man, is the same essence as the Father above, or more simply, he was God made into flesh so humans could understand the unknowable God up above. As we can now easily understand, this only adds to the great massive confusion about the gods and how they are related to one another, sometimes across cultures. Although we are missing numerous details, this once again allows us to put together a more realistic chain of events that helps explain one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world and why all the ancient cultures of the world appear to have such similar beliefs, customs, tradition, gods, and architecture. It is directly related to the second phase of the Exodus under the leadership of the legendary divine twin brothers, moving about the world to occupy the lands which, according to the biblical tradition, each tribe had inherited by lot. After each tribe settled in their new lands, they removed the elites of every group of people they encountered and replaced them with members of their own tribe. Once this political change had been accomplished, they would begin imposing a new religious belief upon the local people, a belief that was built around the 12 primary gods that the tribes all worshipped. However, they uniquely modified, fused, or substituted these 12 gods with the local gods as needed to achieve peace between the new rulers and the native population. This would also incorporate local customs, rituals, and traditions into the new pantheon of gods as necessary to assimilate the local culture and society. This in turn led to the numerous different polytheistic pantheons we still see today, with each being centered around the Trinity of these three primary gods of the supreme God, the King of the gods, and the messenger God. In our next episode, we will return to the ancient land of Canaan and explore its connection to the twin brothers of legend, the Proto-Indo-European people that settled it, and we also begin learning the esoteric story of the great conflict that resulted not only in the destruction of the Temple of Solomon, but also its very strange connection to the ancient belief known as Zoroastrianism. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below and subscribe for future videos.